The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as the spectators filled every bench, murmurs echoing off the high marble walls. The heavy wooden door creaked open and Karoline Leavitt stepped in, her presence commanding even before she reached the defendant's table. She wore a navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her expression unreadable but her stride unshaken. Journalists clutched their notepads tighter, cameras flashed with subtle clicks, and even seasoned lawyers leaned forward slightly. At the front, Judge Roberts adjusted his robe and glanced down over his glasses. His gaze locked onto Karoline with a stern, practiced look of disapproval. There was a palpable tension, something unsaid lingering thick in the air. The clerk called the court to order, and the gavel came down with a firm crack, silencing the rustling papers and shuffling feet. Judge Roberts cleared his throat, his voice sharp and deliberate. "Miss Leavitt, you have flagrantly disrespected this court with your comments outside this chamber, impugning the integrity of these proceedings and, more personally, my character." His tone was icy, his words designed to sting. Karoline remained silent, her eyes meeting his but revealing nothing. The judge continued, "In light of your remarks, and to preserve the dignity of this institution, I am issuing a fine of $50,000. Effective immediately." Audible gasps broke from the crowd, and a few journalists began scribbling furiously. Karoline didn't flinch. The silence around her became deafening. Even those who had come expecting drama didn't foresee this, an overt move to penalize her in public, not just with legal authority but with personal vengeance. Judge Roberts leaned back, satisfied, almost smug. He tapped his gavel again, sealing the order. Karoline slowly adjusted the microphone before her. She didn't move to protest, didn't blurt out an objection. She simply stared, eyes locked on the bench. Her lips parted just slightly, as if holding something back, not fear, but power, the kind of power that chooses its moment. All eyes remained on her. No one dared breathe too loud. Something was building beneath her composed exterior. She didn't react with outrage. No fury, just silence. The kind of silence that made Judge Roberts shift uncomfortably in his chair, even after delivering what he thought was a final blow. The moment felt suspended in time. Karoline remained standing, her fingertips gently resting on the edge of the podium as if grounding herself before a storm. The courtroom was still. Eyes watched her, anticipating either submission or a dramatic outburst, but neither came. Instead, her calm was unnerving, a quiet resistance that drew the attention of even the most distracted observer in the room. Then, in a voice so composed it sliced through the tension like a scalpel, she began to speak. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her tone respectful but resolute, "this fine isn't about courtroom decorum. It's about something much darker. It's about fear, your fear of truth." The words didn't shout, but they hit like a hammer. The judge blinked. The room didn't erupt, didn't stir. It froze. Her voice had the power of clarity, and every syllable carried the weight of accusation. "You think this penalty will silence me," she continued, steady as ever, "but it only amplifies the question every citizen should be asking: what are you trying to hide?" A murmur rippled through the gallery before quickly fading as she held the silence again, letting the air hang heavy with implication. Judge Roberts stiffened in his chair. "Miss Leavitt, you are dangerously close to contempt," he warned. But Karoline didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor," she replied smoothly, "I'm dangerously close to revealing what this courtroom doesn't want exposed, and that terrifies you more than any outburst ever could." She reached for a small stack of papers her legal assistant slid into her hand. "You claim I have undermined the integrity of this institution," she said, lifting the documents just high enough for the judge and audience to see. "But the truth is, integrity is already gone. And I have the evidence to prove it." Gasps and whispered exchanges filled the courtroom once more. The judge raised his gavel, but it lingered midair. Karoline's words had shifted the energy in the room. She was no longer the defendant. She had become the accuser. She scanned the courtroom slowly. "I will not pay this fine," she declared. "Not because I can't, but because doing so would legitimize your misuse of power. And I refuse to fund my own silencing." The judge's expression faltered, for just a second. A twitch of the lip. A shift in posture. But it was there. She had landed the blow without shouting, without dramatics, just truth, spoken plainly and powerfully. Reporters captured every moment. One leaned to another and whispered, "She just flipped the script." Karoline didn't smile, didn't revel in the reaction. She simply stood firm, hands calm, eyes unshaken. Her voice, unwavering, had pierced the courtroom's veil of assumed authority. And for the first time, Judge Roberts realized that this wasn't his stage anymore. Karoline's fingers moved with precision as she pulled out a thick manila folder from her briefcase and placed it squarely on the podium. The room held its breath. With the same composure that had marked her every move, she began sliding out individual sheets, documents marked with official seals, timestamps, and signatures. She lifted one and held it high. This, she said clearly, is a financial disclosure report filed 2 years ago by Judge Roberts himself. It shows an undeclared financial interest in a private corrections contractor, one that profits directly from the rulings made in this very court. The gallery stirred, shocked whispers rising like a storm tide. Karoline laid down the document and picked up another. And this, she said, is an email chain between court clerks, including Judge Roberts' personal aide, discussing a pre-arranged outcome in a case nearly identical to mine. Her voice remained steady, but the tension in the room tightened. Even the judge's gavel, which had previously silenced every disruption, now seemed impotent in his frozen hand. The judge's mouth opened slightly, his gaze darting across the courtroom. "This is not the place for baseless accusations," he barked, but Karoline was already holding up a third document. "Then perhaps you'll recognize your own signature on this judicial ethics waiver," she said, unflinching, "signed the same week you ruled in favor of a company that donated to your campaign fund, while you sat on the board of their legal advisory council." The silence was deafening. Court officers shifted nervously. The stenographer paused. Karoline's legal team stood behind her, silent, letting her lead but ready to support. She stepped back for a moment, giving the court time to absorb the weight of what she had just laid bare. Her next move wasn't loud or dramatic, she simply pressed a button on a remote. A nearby screen lit up with a slideshow of evidence, scanned documents, email screenshots, timelines, names, and connections. "The fine you imposed, Your Honor, was never about court rules," she said, pacing slowly now. It was a desperate move to crush dissent before the rot at the core of this institution could be exposed. But here it is, laid bare, no longer hidden behind robes or ritual. The judge pounded his gavel, this time shouting, "This is an outrageous breach of courtroom procedure." But Karoline didn't even turn. "You no longer control this narrative, sir. The truth speaks for itself now." A reporter rose quietly and walked toward the door, phone already to his ear. Another began live tweeting from inside the courtroom. Karoline looked toward the gallery, locking eyes with the people, not the officials. "You've all been told this is justice," she said, motioning toward the bench. "But justice doesn't come with a price tag, or a muzzle." Judge Roberts, visibly shaken, reached for his water glass but knocked it over with a trembling hand. It clattered loudly, the sound echoing awkwardly across the chamber. Karoline didn't smirk, didn't revel in his discomfort. She just stood there, calmly revealing truth after truth, watching as the authority that had once loomed over her began to crumble under the weight of evidence too solid to ignore. Outside the courthouse, the air was electric. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, while reporters scrambled to go live, their voices urgent and crackling with disbelief. Karoline Leavitt just detonated a political and legal bombshell inside Courtroom 7, one anchor declared as their camera zoomed in on the courthouse doors. The footage of Karoline confronting Judge Roberts had already gone viral within minutes, clips surfacing on every platform, edited, subtitled, reshared. Her defiance, her precision, the documents, it was all being dissected in real time. Within half an hour, a small crowd had gathered outside, holding handmade signs that read, "Truth matters," and, "No silence, no shame." Many had simply dropped what they were doing and come running after seeing the broadcast online. Others emerged from nearby offices, still holding coffees and phones, drawn to the scene as if history were unfolding right in front of them. Karoline stepped out of the courthouse, flanked by her legal team. Microphones extended toward her like spears, questions flying from all directions. "Karoline, do you have proof of Judge Roberts' financial ties? Are you going to file an ethics complaint? What happens next?" She raised her hand gently and waited. The reporters quieted, and then, with that same clarity that had stunned the courtroom, she spoke. "This is not just about me," she said. "This is about a system that punishes truth-tellers and shields those who manipulate the law for personal gain." Today was only the beginning. The crowd erupted in applause. Her words struck a chord, clear, unshaken, and impossible to spin. Social media hashtags trended instantly. Hashtag #StandWithCaroline, #Roberts exposed, #Justice Unchained. Major news networks began rolling out special segments, interviewing legal analysts who admitted they'd never seen anything like it. Some called it a legal revolution. Others warned of potential political fallout. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, congressional aides scrambled as calls from constituents flooded in. What's being done about Judge Roberts? Why did it take Karoline Leavitt to bring this to light? Senators from both sides of the aisle cautiously weighed in, some expressing concern over the allegations, others deflecting until the facts were confirmed. A well-known former federal judge appeared on a national broadcast, saying, "The integrity of our judicial system depends on accountability. If what Ms. Leavitt presented is accurate, we are facing a serious breach of ethical conduct." Back outside, Karoline faced the cameras again. "I never set out to be a symbol," she said. "I just refused to stay quiet when silence was being sold as justice. We all deserve better, and if the law won't protect us from corruption, then we must protect it from the corrupt." The roar of the crowd echoed down the avenue. As evening approached, the courthouse steps became a sea of people. Candles were lit, stories were shared, young women and men stepped up to open mics set on the sidewalk, voicing their own experiences with injustice. Karoline remained, not as a distant figure but standing among them, listening. She didn't speak again that night, but she didn't have to. Her silence now wasn't suppression. It was solidarity. The message had already been heard, and it was spreading far beyond that city street. The following morning, Washington was no longer calm. Headlines blared Karoline Leavitt's name alongside phrases like, "judicial earthquake," and "legal uprising." Inside a sleek Capitol Hill conference room, a bipartisan ethics committee had already convened an emergency session. The evidence Karoline presented was not only undeniable, it was already circulating across government desks, screens, and inboxes. Senators who had once dismissed her as a political firebrand were now studying every document she exposed. Some feared the precedent, others feared the accountability. But all of them knew they couldn't ignore her anymore. At the same time, Judge Roberts sat in his private chambers, the silence deafening. His phone buzzed with missed calls from media outlets, fellow judges, and high-powered attorneys, all asking the same thing: was it true? His hands trembled slightly as he sifted through printed headlines piled across his desk. Each one was another nail, another crack in the once impenetrable armor of judicial invincibility. He reached for his statement draft, something generic about baseless accusations and political motivations, but even he knew it wouldn't hold. Back on the public front, Karoline arrived at a packed press conference. The room buzzed with anticipation, reporters seated shoulder to shoulder. She didn't arrive with an army of spokespersons. She walked in alone, confident, centered, carrying nothing but the same folder from court. She stepped to the podium and looked across the sea of cameras and flashing lights. "Let's be clear," she began, "I didn't stand up in that courtroom because I wanted attention. I did it because I couldn't live with the silence anymore." The room leaned in. What we saw yesterday wasn't just about one judge. It was a glimpse into a system that counts on people being too afraid, too intimidated, or too exhausted to challenge it. But that era ends now. Her words were steady. Each sentence landed like a drumbeat, undeniable and firm. She continued, "Judge Roberts tried to find me into submission. But money isn't power. Truth is. And now the truth belongs to all of you." Applause erupted. Not from the press, who maintained their professional detachment, but from the citizens watching on the giant screens outside and streaming live on devices everywhere. In cities across the country, groups were already organizing town halls, demanding judicial transparency reforms, and circulating petitions calling for Roberts' removal. What had started as a courtroom moment had ignited a nationwide reckoning. Karoline took a breath and looked directly into the cameras. "To everyone who's ever been silenced, your voice matters. To those who've been punished for telling the truth, you are not alone. And to anyone still hiding behind titles and robes, know this: your time is up." She stepped back from the mic, not needing to say more. The crowd didn't cheer wildly, they stood. Quietly, powerfully, in a unified moment of respect. Later that evening, as news anchors wrapped up a full day of coverage, legal analysts declared it a turning point in modern judicial history. One said, "Karoline Leavitt did in 24 hours what decades of watchdog reports couldn't. She made the public care." And in his chambers, Judge Roberts sat alone, staring at the glowing screen of a breaking news alert. Senate Ethics Committee opens formal investigation into Judge Roberts' financial ties. For Karoline, it wasn't victory she sought, it was awakening. And as the sun set behind the Capitol dome, casting long shadows across the marble steps, one thing was clear: the system had been warned. And it would never be the same again.